Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Channel 6 TV Community Focus. Glad to be with you tonight. I'm Kenny Fogle, and it's countdown to election time. It's coming up just a few weeks from now, as a matter of fact, November the 8th. We're going to be making a lot of decisions that day, and I hope you're one of the participants. If you need to get a little participant ribbon, says I voted that day, and we hope you can. Well, we've got a gentleman here with us. I'll be honest with you, don't really need to make a introduction, because I think most people know him. He's been around Bardstown for quite some time in several different roles, and but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Mr. Dick Heaton. Dick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kenny. Good to be here, and glad to have people watching. Glad they're interested in the political process.
That's the whole key. The key is our job is to make people understand what's going on, and hope people understand what's going on. It's not all just entertainment. There's a lot of serious business goes on in politics.
That's true.
Yeah, and so before we get into anything, former city council, former mayor, and you took off a few years, and now you're getting back into the stick of things.
As you know, I retired from the mayor's job back in 2010, chose not to run for re-election due to some health issues with cancer, and I'm happy to say after 6 years, I'm completely cancer-free each and every year, so that part of my life I've gotten squared away. I thought I had maybe completed 10 years of public service might have been enough, but quite frankly, after sitting back and watching what's happened within the city in the last 2 years, I decided that perhaps I had something to offer and I want to get back in and make a difference perhaps.
Well, like you said, we could do a whole new story sometime about being a cancer survivor. I'm sure that we could do a whole nother show someday on that, but there has been a lot going on. I mean, before we get into what's going on right now, let's talk a bit about what happened when you were mayor. I mean, there were some things going on. Just tell us a little bit of highlights of what the Mayor Dick Heaton's office looked like.
Well, I think financially things were pretty sound. I like to think that we completed a number of infrastructure projects when I became mayor. It was the start of the Town Creek interceptor line, the big sewer line that was way over past due on time it was needed. It had started back in Mayor Brown's tenure, and 8 years later after Mayor Hibbs, it still hadn't been started, so we got that started. We did a $5 million upgrade to the water treatment plant, a new clear well, and probably the highlight, I guess, in terms of infrastructure was the $3 million streetscape project that we did on Main Street, which included an $800,000 water line project that was badly needed in the downtown area. So I think those things are some of the highlights from the standpoint of major improvements to the community. And we also, my luck would have it, I took over at a time when we went through the biggest recession we've had since the Great Depression back in 2008, 2009. And we were able to get through that without raising taxes. We made some tough cuts and decisions, but we weathered the storm with 13% unemployment in Nelson County. It was a very difficult time, but we did so without raising taxes and without having to lay off people at City Hall. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of happy that we were able to accomplish that.
Well, a few years later, we were named the most beautiful city in the United States. How you feel like it had to start somewhere. It didn't just happen overnight.
I think not so much me, but I do think the streetscape project was played a major role in us receiving that award. And the good part about that was I spent a lot of time in Frankfort back in those days. We were able to get stimulus money that was available. Had help from Judge Watts and the fiscal court and the council. And we got over $2.3 million in grants, so the city's out of pocket was about $800,000. So that was a great benefit to the community to get $2.3 million. And we got $100,000 out of Congressman Brent Guthrie's office, which I worked with him closely on that. So it's nice when you can do a $3 million project and only less than a third comes out of your pocket.
Well, I studied a lot of mayors over the past many years of living around the area, and I think one of the things that was unique about your administration was your contacts in Frankfort and Washington, D.C. I mean, most mayors didn't have quite the network that you've had over the years, and I think you still have that network.
Yeah, I do. I work pretty well both with Democrats and Republicans. Brett Guthrie and I work closely. I work well with Senator Heaton and Representative Floyd, and I think I'll be able to work with whoever we send up there this fall.
Okay. Well, you've been a councilman and a mayor. Now, is there a lot of difference between the two? Can you be as effective as a councilman as you were as a mayor?
Well, they're very different roles. The mayor really has a lot more of the day-to-day authority and decision-making in the city. I would describe the mayor as the CEO of a company, and the council as, the board of directors. And so the board of directors make decisions on financial matters primarily. They don't get involved with personnel and day-to-day operations, but with a council, you can influence personnel through, you have to approve, the employee designations and the classifications and pay levels and things such as that. And of course, you handle the budget, you really have a lot of control there. So very diverse responsibilities in that regard.
Okay. Well, you just mentioned at the start of the interview that you had some concerns about what's going on at the Bardstown City Council, or what's going on in Bardstown City government right today. Are your concerns more centered around the mayor or more centered around the actions of the council?
I would have to say both. I think as a council person, I've been concerned, I've been embarrassed to some degree about, the notoriety we've gotten, and a lot of it's been bad notoriety, statewide in terms of some of the, they're not on the same page, so to speak, the council, somewhat dysfunctional. I wouldn't say there's factions, so to speak, because they're not always two groups always working always against one another, but they do not agree a lot of times. And while you never have total agreement, but I do think I'm concerned about how fractious the debates have been within the council. You can feel a lot of tension and a lot of discourse there. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on the mayor, but I think obviously the mayor is in charge of the meetings, and he's the person who ultimately needs to provide leadership to the council and for the community, and I think that's been lacking as well.
Well, we went from $11 million surplus to about, it's about a $1 million surplus in the last year. I mean, that's who can we point a finger at?
Well, I have studied since I decided to run for city council. I've spent many, many hours studying the budgets all through my term and the last two terms. And I think I'm pretty close on the numbers. Yes, there was close to an $11 million reserve a few years ago. That was a historical high over the last several years. During my time as mayor, it fluctuated between $8.5 and $3.5 million based on the capital projects we did. At the end of this year, going into this new budget year, the city had a little over $4 million in the reserve, not $1 million, but $4 million. So it was spent on capital improvements primarily. So that's not necessarily bad because there was water projects, there were sewer projects, there was electric projects, paving on the streets were increased. So that's where it's been spent. It leaves it with $4 million starting this year. Now, the budget shows they're proposing to spend $3.2 million of that, which would take you down under $1 million in reserves, which I think is unsafe. It puts you in a financial bind. They are planning on getting a loan for $2.3 million worth of water projects. Mm-hmm. If they do that, that'll leave them with a balance of about $2 million at the end of this budget year. A historical low, and one that should be of concern to everybody. Well,
outside of the personality and the dysfunction and all that kind of stuff going on, is there any particular issue voters really should be looking at when they're looking at their Bardstown city government and what's going on?
Yes, I think you've got to look at the qualifications and the background of the candidates. I think there were some people elected in the last 2 or 3 elections, and maybe a lot of people really didn't know that much about them. But I think now with this election, there are a number of candidates that have a reputation, they have a record, they're known business people. So I really think people need to look at the qualifications and the experience and education that they have, because you're dealing with a $40 million budget, and you're dealing with 100 plus employees. You're dealing with 5 utilities. Most cities have 3 utilities or 2 utilities, water, sewer, and that's about it. We have electric and cable and internet on top of that. These are not simple utilities to handle in terms of budgeting and making decision on capital improvements. So I really think the next council needs to be of a higher level of education, a higher level of experience in business to understand and be able to make sound decisions.
Well, we got pretty much a full-time fire department now. Was that the right move to make? Do we make it too fast, or is it too expensive? How do you fix that?
I think they pulled the trigger way too fast. I mean, obviously, they admittedly put together a full-time fire department without a funding mechanism in place, with the exception of blowing through some more reserves last year. This year, they basically, I think, they painted themselves in a corner, partly because of the full-time fire department, and they raised the occupational license fee to fund that. And that might take care of it, but I think there's some long-term ramifications. When the 2 departments split, they had mutual aid agreements to share their equipment. They don't have that any longer. They postponed the purchase of a $650,000 pumper this year, but how long can you postpone that? Sooner or later you've got to acquire the equipment.
A lot of buckets.
The equipment. So that is troubling to me. Having talked to a number of insurance agents, about the ISO rating, I think there was some discussion that the full-time fire department would lower our ISO rating, which would result in lower premiums. Having talked to some insurance agents here in town, that is not happening because now we don't have equipment for a full-time fire department to be fully equipped to serve their customers. So that ISO rating is still high, and that's a bad thing. So I think that's going to we're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at that and seeing whether we can justify that. It's added about $500,000 a year just in personnel costs, not counting the equipment costs. So I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time and take a hard look at that. And I really think we're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to attract some more volunteers, because I've heard that we have probably one of the lowest amount of volunteers serving the city fire department than we've had in many years.
Okay, well, the 911 issue is not going away. The Rex department may be settled, but still costing a lot of money. So you got a lot of work cut out for you over the next couple of years.
Certainly do. And I think you can tell, I've spent quite a bit of time analyzing the budgets, and that's one thing I feel like I do when I get involved in the community, whether it's as an elected official or as a volunteer or a board member. I like to think that I take a front and center approach and not a sit back and wait and let somebody else do most of the hard work.
When you talk about the checks and balances, the budget really is the check and balance for what the mayor's doing. And the mayor can propose stuff and put stuff into action, but if it's not paid for, that's where basically the city council comes in.
Very much a lot of that. Of course, as I said earlier, there are the number of employees, the number of classifications. You have to approve that as the council. I saw in the paper today where the council will have to approve whomever the mayor might recommend as our new police chief. Right. So I would hope they would share all that information with the council before they have to make that decision, because that's an important position. Mm-hmm.
Well, again, one thing I know you are running. You've run before. You know what you're getting into. This time you're running as a slate. You've got a few other people running with you. Is there a particular reason for that, or? Well,
yes. This was kind of floated out there by a number of people earlier in the year as more and more of this split of services that was happening within the county and the corporation of the fire department, and you could see the discord among the council members, both sometimes with themselves, sometimes with the mayor, and people said, you really need to put together a slate and get 6 people and take them all out. That was sort of out there. I wasn't proposing that, but people were proposing that to me. But I did start talking to some people. People were approaching me about running, and I said, I'm really seriously thinking about it, but I don't want to do this all on my own. I'd like to see some other people who I feel are equally as qualified as myself run. And from that discussion, several of us got together, and it resulted with David Dones and John Kelly and Joe Buckman and myself decided to run as a slate. And a slate is fairly common when you have a governor's race and a lieutenant governor. They're a slate, and now we have a president and a vice president slates running. But you and I know about slates that date back years ago in the Bardstown City Council races dating back to 1966, when Mayor W.G.A. Simpson had a slate of council members and his challenger, Gus Wilson, had a slate of 6. Gus won the election as mayor, and 5 of his 6 members on his council slate won, with Dr. Harry Spalding being the lone council slate member of W.G.A. Simpson's slate that got elected. And so, I think Gus and Mayor Simpson had a good idea of trying to surround themselves with people they could work with and people that were qualified, who understood. And I think, Gus was able to attract, he had turnover over 24 years. Obviously, some didn't serve the full 24 years, but he always attracted a pretty strong group of mostly business people and professionals to serve on the council, and I think it served the city well. So we hope that will be the same thing that we can do if we're all fortunate enough to get elected. I think we can work together. We bring a diverse background of qualifications. Three of us have been elected officials, but we're all very different in our background in business.
Well, I know you're a very busy person. You got your business at Conway Heaton. You chairman of the Guthrie Opportunity Center, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that I'm leaving off the list. You realize there's only 24 hours in a day. You can't. How's that?
Well, that's the way I've been wired my whole adult life. I think when I was mayor, I served on an advisory board with the Ford Motor Company dealer, and I'm still on that board today. I was chairman of the Kentucky Automobile Dealers Association while I was mayor and ran a business. That's when we started raising the money for the Guthrie Center during that time. So this is not new for me to be, have multiple issues and multiple things on my plate. It's something I enjoy. As I said earlier, my health is returned. I try to keep in shape, and I like being involved. And that's. Some people who are cancer survivors take a different note. They say, "Oh, you've got a second chance in life. You ought to sit back and take it easy." But, I love this community, Bardstown and Nelson County, way too much to sit back. And I feel like I have something to offer in a positive way. And I think I'd like to hopefully think that if I'm elected, I can make a difference.
All right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we get out of here for the voters they need to know about? Like I said, they probably know you pretty well right now, but if there's anything else you'd like to add before we go, feel free.
I would just say that I think if you look at my record as a business person, as a community activist, as an elected official, I've got a record of getting things done. I think I'm not bragging, but I think you can look at that, and when I get involved, I do get things done. I hope people will remember that, and I'm ready to do that again for the city of Bardstown. I want to thank everybody who's watching this telecast, and I hope that you will get out and vote on November 8th, and I would appreciate your consideration and support and your vote on November 8th.
All right, Bardstown City Council candidate, Mr. Dick Heaton, we appreciate you being here today. And again, November the 8th is the day to get out and vote. Some early voting going on. If you need to check into that, if you're going to be out of town, check on that. But again, voting is going to end that day.